I always wondered, after the first Pacific Rim came out, if this would become a long-standing franchise. It had feels of, Transformers along with other movies, and there was a lot of people out there that really enjoyed the first Pacific Rim. And then when the second one released, guys, I think that people at this point can all agree that it was somewhat of a downgrade from the first movie. But nonetheless, there's a lot of people really wondering and clamoring for more Pacific Rim at some point or another in the future. So what I wanted to talk about, guys, in this first segment of the show is everything that we know so far about Pacific Rim 3. So let's get into it. In an article, guys, that was written by Biplab Mazumber of the Cinemaholic, Pacific Rim 3. And when Pacific Rim released in 2013, it seemed to tickle us mortals a never-ending primal urge to be awed by big spectacles. It catered to the same domain as to what the Transformers franchise has been doing for years. But unlike the aforementioned franchise, Pacific Rim seemed to combine brawn with the brain. It is proud of its ridiculousness and unabashedly flourishes on an enormous scale. In a way, Pacific Rim did what many modern-day Transformers and Godzilla adaptations couldn't do with their giant characters. A huge part of the movie's success goes to its visionary director, Guillermo del Toro. It just goes to show how even a theme as ridiculous as giant robots fighting giant monsters in order to save the Earth can be fully entertaining and satisfying under capable hands. After Pacific Rim's resounding success, the second movie came out in 2018. Even though it didn't exactly replicate both the critical and commercial success of the predecessor, it still wasn't a major flop anyway. It suffered the loss of major cast members of the first one, and changing hands in the direction also didn't help either. So what I'll say, guys, is from the first Pacific Rim to the second one, the one thing that kind of bothered me was not only the director. Sometimes having a director direct the same series for a period of time sometimes isn't a good thing, but I think I would have liked to see Del Toro have continued this franchise. But nonetheless, one thing that bothered me more than having Del Toro step down from the director's chair was actually the fact that Charlie Hunnam and other actors ended up not wanting to be a part of the second, Pacific Rim. Now, obviously, guys, we've had some other, new characters that came into the second movie, Uprising, and, I think that they're good actors like John Boyega and such, but I would say that there's something about when you're trying to establish a franchise, you really want to have things that feel very familiar, and that being like characters and such. That's one thing that I think that they kind of a big misstep that they made. So what happened to Pacific Rim, guys? So Pacific Rim tells a story of kaiju battles in epic proportions, but it's not just a mindless action flick. At its heart, Pacific Rim contains relatable characters with tangible emotional crisis. The movie imagines a world where a breach beneath the Pacific Ocean acts as a gateway to Earth for extraterrestrial beings, the kaijus. To save Earth, humans create massive Jaegers, but more often than not, kaijus get better of the robots. These huge robots are controlled by two pilots who are connected by a neutral link. Charlie Hunnam, he played a washed-up relay Beckett, an ex-Jaeger pilot who lost his fellow pilot and his brother Yancey in Kaiju battle. He is fighting with his demons when he's forced out of retirement as Kaiju threats are becoming unbearable. Idris Elba, he plays Marshal Stacker Pentecost, the commander of Jaeger Base, and Rinko Kikuchi plays Mako Mori, Stacker's adopted daughter. So Pacific Rim was a lot of fun, but in a weird way, it also made you invest in the story, which normally doesn't happen in ridiculous monster fights, robots movies. The success of the movie translated into the huge expectations for Pacific Rim Uprising. The sequel differed from the first two major aspects, and that made all the difference. Firstly, Del Toro wasn't the one on the director's chair anymore. Instead, he was a producer. Stephen S. DeKnight, who did Daredevil and Spartacus, was a great addition, but he was no Del Toro. However, the biggest blow is the absence of the Hunnam's relay. Still, the story attempts to be bigger and bolder than the first one. And John Boyega, guys, he did a fine job, but I gotta say that even though there was a lot of backlash. I didn't like the movie nearly as much as the first one. Probably a lot of it had to do with the direction, but also I think a lot of it had to do with just different characters, and it's just kind of, you start getting a little bit disconnected when things like that happen. Now, the movie wasn't quite a disappointment, but it traded almost on similar grounds just as the first one, but on a much larger scale. It was still wildly fun. The VFX action sequences and technological marvels were extraordinary, and the performances of the leads were also satisfactory. The ending of the movie, however, sets up some more interesting things for the future. And I agree. I thought the VFX were really good. I thought that, yeah, they tried to make it bigger and better, but it just didn't seem to land on all of those areas. Now, what is Pacific Rim 3 going to be about? The ending of Uprising is what excites me the most. After Newton is captured, he warns that precursors won't stop and that more threats are coming. Jake ends the movie by saying that this time humans will take the fight to them. In literal English, precursors themselves will have to face humans and their Jaegers, as the third movie will see them traveling through the breach. The intention to take the battle to the world of precursors can have multiple interesting repercussions. In the dominant enemy land, the pilots and Jaegers will be in a survival mode. In a way, it can bring a lot of memories of the Alien franchise and in a good way. The tense narrative, the survivalist instincts, the madness of the overwhelming aliens can be a few things that can affect the psychological equilibrium of the human characters. So, one of the big things, guys, that people really want Charlie Hunnam and his character to come back. I would agree. I'd love to see that kind of come full circle in the third movie. I just feel that if Charlie Hunnam and them, they probably were asked to do the second movie, and they probably said they didn't want to do it if Del Toro wasn't the director, if there wasn't, a really prestigious director doing the second one. So I don't know if they're going to get Charlie Hunnam back. I hope they would do, but it's hard to say. As far as the cast, Jake Pentecost will be at the forefront of the fight against the precursors, so John Boyega will definitely return. Mako Mori's death in the second movie was a devastating moment, but the makers have shown interest in continuing Mako's story. So if Mako is not actually dead, or if they can somehow bring her back, then Rinko Kikuchi can make a comeback too. And then we are really hoping for Hunnam to return too. Charlie Day will obviously be there, and so will Gorman. So obviously, guys, I think everybody wants Charlie Hunnam's character back, but that remains to be seen. So when will this movie most likely come out? The first two movies have a gap of 5 years between them. So even if the next one doesn't follow the same formula, 2020 still seems way too early for the movie. After the less than stellar performance of Uprising, makers will want to trade cautiously and definitely won't hurry things up. The third one has a rich story to tell, that too in a more expansive capacity, so we can expect Pacific Rim 3 to release in 2021 or in 2022. However, there hasn't been any official confirmation from the people involved yet. So, at the end of the day, guys, I think that we will see Pacific Rim 3 most likely in the next couple of years, I would say. I would say, guys, that especially with the pandemic going on, things have all been pushed back. That being production, from releases, and all of those different things. The industry has been affected in a major way. And so I would say, guys, even if they had the initial concepts and such of Pacific Rim 3, most likely those things are all getting pushed back. So I wouldn't be surprised, guys, if we have to wait another 3 to 5 years for this movie to actually come out because of the pandemic. I would have said a little bit sooner, but even with the kind of mediocre reception in reviews and such, and then on top of that, as far as the money is concerned, it cost them about, I think, between $150 to $170 million to make Pacific Rim Uprising, and then they made $290 million. But at the end of the day, that $150 to $170 to make the movie in the first place doesn't even take into consideration all the marketing going into it. So they probably didn't make as much as they were hoping. Let's just put it that way. So it's hard to say how much money they would put into a Pacific Rim 3. It's a very, tough question. But at this point, guys, nothing's really been confirmed, and this is all pretty much speculation. But these are the things that we know so far about Pacific Rim 3, and a lot of it, like I said, is speculation, not knowing where they're going to go with the story. Is Charlie Hunnam's character coming back? Who knows, guys? But let me know in the comment section below, What are you guys most excited about in Pacific Rim 3? What do you think they need to do in order to kind of rewrite the ship in the right direction so you can start getting some good critical reception? There's been a lot of talk that Pacific Rim is going to try to join the MonsterVerse, that being with like Godzilla and King Kong, which I think would actually be really good. You know, it's kind of a cheesy story. So if you took that and you put it into Godzilla and King Kong, it would feel so real at the same time because of it being in the MonsterVerse. It would be so much more relatable almost. So I kind of hope that that ends up happening. But let me know what you guys want to see. And for more Pacific Rim 3 content and videos, stay here with Zero TV.